So my aha moment or surprise when I was listening to the NPR interview with Top Scott would be his positivity toward millennials or Generation Y or Generation Text. I'm a millennial. I was born in 1992. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. So from a very early age, I had heard that millennials were the bane of people's existence. They were entitled, the worst thing in the world. So it was nice to hear some kind words. So they brought up some great points in the NPR show. One is how well informed millennials are. So there's so many ways to obtain information physically. People can get it through their laptop, their iPhone, their TV. And there's different mediums for it too. People can watch CNN or they can watch Fox News, typical kind of news outlets. They can watch the nightly news, local stations. They can also get it through comedy shows. They can keep up to date on current events. Callers mentioned Jon Stewart's The Daily Show and Stephen Colbert's The Colbert Report. Basically, with so many ways to obtain information physically in so many different mediums, the busiest person can stay informed and up to date, which is great. The variety of ways to get information and again how they are sent out to the public also allows for different perspectives. People from different backgrounds, cities, countries can share their thoughts and opinions, and people can actually hear them easily. So they're not just basing their ideas of their surroundings or the world off of their experience, because not everyone has the same experience. Basically, millennials can gather a lot of insight. Another great part about millennials is their kind of BS tracker. They're so comfortable with the internet. They're so connected to what's around them through technology, that I think it's easier for them to figure out fact versus opinion. Millennials understand that you can put anything on the internet. There's blogs, there's YouTube videos, but they can differentiate between opinion and when opinion is backed up with facts. And I think they can do this easier than other generations. Another great aspect would be their sense. I would say millennials' sense of community through technology. People can connect now through social media, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, any of that. They can connect with people miles or countries away, and they can find people with the same interests. They can also share their opinion. So basically, this visibility of public opinion, I think, allows for more interaction and an open dialogue about social, deep issues that may have been more hidden in the past. And of course, this is not to say that this kind of access at your, instant access or information at your fingertips is all great. Our generation textbook mentions the Iraq conflict in 2003 and how children were seeing, live footage. They were seeing pretty graphic battles and were terrified because they thought the war was happening in their own backyard. I understand that. There's also this kind of problem with instant gratification, with the lack of impulse control, with information so easily attained when things take a while to load, when there's so much variety and all of a sudden it's taken away, even if for a moment. I understand millennials would get more frustrated. But I do think that the negatives, while there are, I think the positives outweigh the negatives. Another aspect of millennials that I love that I really don't think has that many drawbacks is their appreciation of diversity. I love that attack ads are not working as much, and because people are exposed to a global world. Again, people are so connected. So this exposure to diversity has created it's created some great statistics. The NPR show mentioned that 60% support gay marriage compared to 30% in the past, and that more than 80% now see interracial dating as a great thing. So, like I said, I mentioned the positives and I mentioned the negatives. And for me, when people mention the negatives of millennials, I see where they're coming from. But when their points on the negative side of millennials is based on kind of general misconceptions, that's when it becomes a little frustrating. So, one of the misconceptions they talked about on NPR was this digital era, millennials are becoming more stupid. And they're very shallow. They simply rely on, pop culture. But I would say that it's not fact-based and completely unwarranted. I think when people that are not millennials talk about their generation, I think they're looking at it with the nostalgia. And it blinds them. So, a great quote, I was reading a book, Huck's Raft by Stephen Mintz. He has a great quote in here that talks about kind of the glory days that people talk about. And he mentions here, he says, the romanticized portraits of the normality of childhood during the golden years earlier than the 20th century do not hold up under scrutiny, which I think is great and a valid point. I know when I talk with my dad and we talk about kind of our generational clashes or our generational misunderstandings, he has blinders on. He talks about, the music was great in the 80s. The film was great in the 80s. It was safer in the 80s. But he's forgetting that there was a AIDS epidemic that people reacted horribly to. He's forgetting about kind of the negatives of, Reaganomics. He's forgetting about a giant Coke problem back in the 80s. So like I said, the misconceptions are what bugs me the most. And I think going forward, I wish the term millennial was not such a broad statement. So when I was looking up my generation, Generation Y or millennials, it said it could either be people that are born either in 1997 through 1995, or it could be 1980 to 1994. And I think that we get mixed up with Generation Z, which also is broad because it says people born 1995 through 2012 or 1996 to the present. So it's frustrating when these terms are so broad and they're such blanket terms, because not only would I like more clarification, but again, like these two generations, Generation Z, Generation Y, I believe get mixed up because I believe we have such different experiences. So Generation Z and Generation Y, yes, we've been surrounded by technology for a very long time, but Generation Z's technology is much more advanced. A perfect example I can think of is growing up, I did not have Facebook until much later in life. I grew up more with AOL Instant Messenger and MySpace. Now, while I was connected to people, AOL and MySpace, you weren't able to form a community like you were with Facebook. AOL Instant Messenger, I couldn't share articles. I couldn't post a status. I couldn't share pictures. With Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, you can. Another one is that the instant gratification, again, I did have a lot of information at my fingertips, but it was slower getting there. I remember dial-up. I remember it took a second to load a page. So these blanket terms, millennial, Generation Y, the me generation, and Generation Z, post-millennials, the terms need more clarification, and they need to be, they should not be mixed up. I think that's where you run into a lot of problems, and I think this is where you start to get misconceptions and overgeneralizations about a large number of people. And I hope going forward, through this class and through articles I read for the Gen Text textbook, I hope that I can either these terms can become more defined, or more distinct characteristics can be discussed that clearly identifies Generation Y, Generation Z, moving forward. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.